November 16, 1951, dawned with a familiar chill as the morning mist gradually receded from the bustling expanse of Portsmouth Harbor. It was on this particular day that Captain Dennis Campbell ascended the gangway of HMS Illustrious, a seemingly ordinary ascent with an extraordinary item in his possession. Tucked securely within his briefcase was a solitary sheet of paper, bearing a diagram of such disarming simplicity that a child might have sketched it. A flight deck subtly angled 10 degrees to the port side. At first glance, it appeared to be nothing particularly groundbreaking. Yet, the profound significance of this unassuming drawing remained utterly unknown to him at that moment. Within a mere 18 months, this modest sketch would prove to be a more potent, life-saving innovation for naval aviators than any sophisticated weapons system ever conceived. What Captain Campbell did comprehend, however, was a stark and terrifying reality that weighed heavily on his mind. In the preceding 12 months alone, the venerable Royal Navy had endured the devastating loss of 43 aircraft due to landing mishaps. This alarming figure represented 43 meticulously engineered machines utterly destroyed, 17 skilled pilots tragically killed, and scores more grievously injured or permanently maimed. Every single one of these heartbreaking losses had transpired during the final, fraught 30 seconds of flight. It was that critical, desperate interval when a massive 30-ton jet, hurtling through the air at an astonishing 140 miles per hour, attempted the perilous maneuver of snagging an arresting wire on a deck that relentlessly pitched and rolled. Just 60 feet ahead, a formidable steel barricade loomed, an unforgiving sentinel poised to tear apart any aircraft that failed to secure its hold. The situation across the Atlantic was even more dire, with the Americans grappling with far grimmer statistics. Story. Throughout 1951, the U.S. Navy, as its carrier aviation branch, suffered a staggering 776 Class A mishaps. These were accidents of the most severe category, resulting in either fatalities or the complete destruction of an aircraft, a harrowing average of more than 2 such incidents every single day. While these numbers were alarming during peacetime, the ongoing Korean War dramatically amplified the carnage. The USS Boxer, for instance, reported 7 catastrophic barrier crashes during a single deployment, a testament to the immense pressures and inherent dangers. Similarly, the USS Princeton experienced the loss of 9 aircraft within a mere 4-week period, underscoring the relentless and brutal toll on both equipment and human life. On the traditional straight-deck carriers, missing the arresting wires presented an inescapable and terrifying outcome. A pilot faced an immediate, stark choice: either collide head-on with the barricade at full throttle, or careen uncontrollably into the tightly packed aircraft parked forward on the deck. Both scenarios almost invariably led to a catastrophic fireball, an inferno that could claim the lives of a dozen men within a matter of seconds. The dawn of the jet age had arrived with revolutionary speed and power, but the existing infrastructure of carrier aviation simply could not keep pace with these advanced machines. For example, the F-9F Panther, a cutting-edge jet fighter, landed at a speed 40 knots faster than its propeller-driven predecessor, the Hellcat. Compounding this challenge, the new jet engines required an agonizing 7 seconds to spool up from idle, an eternity when a pilot found himself sinking rapidly toward the unforgiving ocean at a rate of 20 feet per second. Landing signal officers, stationed precariously on the carrier's port quarter, would frantically wave their paddles, attempting to guide pilots to safety. However, by the time a pilot could even perceive that he was approaching too low, too fast, or too high, the unyielding laws of physics had already sealed his fate. Stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. Please write a comment about where you are from and what you think about the video topic. Every seasoned admiral, every brilliant engineer, and every courageous test pilot acutely understood the grim truth. Carrier aviation had reached its absolute breaking point. Jet aircraft undeniably represented the future of aerial combat and projection of power. Yet, such a future held little relevance when the present reality was relentlessly claiming the lives of dedicated personnel. What Captain Campbell, and indeed no one present in that critical Portsmouth meeting room, could possibly have known, was that his audacious idea would initially be met with outright rejection, derision, and dismissed as utterly impossible by the very experts whose professional mandate was to conquer impossible problems. Furthermore, the true breakthrough, the pivotal moment of innovation, would not emerge from the bureaucratic labyrinth of committees or the meticulous calculations of wind tunnels, but rather from the unwavering refusal of one individual to accept that brave men should continue to perish due to a fundamental design flaw. The genesis of this profound problem could be traced back to 1945, precisely the moment when Lieutenant Commander William P. Rahn executed the very first jet landing aboard the USS Wake Island. His FR-1 Fireball touched down at a blistering 90 knots, a speed 20 knots greater than any piston fighter before it, and the arresting gear cables shrieked under the immense strain as they valiantly absorbed the colossal kinetic energy. While the landing itself was successful, the ominous warning inherent in that unprecedented speed was, regrettably, ignored. By 1950, every major naval power found itself confronting the identical escalating crisis. Jet engines had undeniably revolutionized aerial speed and altitude capabilities, offering unparalleled performance. However, their inherent slow throttle response inadvertently created a deadly trap for pilots attempting carrier landings. In contrast, pilots of propeller aircraft could simply chop their throttle upon receiving the landing signal officer's cut signal, allowing their aircraft to literally fall onto the deck with remarkable precision. Jet aircraft, by their very design, could not replicate this maneuver. They were compelled to land power on, maintaining a significant amount of thrust until their wheels made contact with the deck. This was a critical necessity because their powerful engines required an unacceptably long time to accelerate if a pilot needed to abort the landing and execute a go-around. This fundamental difference in engine response created an absolutely hellish scenario for naval aviators. Pilots were forced to fly their final approach with their engines spooled up and ready, irrevocably committed to the landing, yet simultaneously unable to climb quickly if they happened to miss the crucial arresting wires. On a conventional straight-deck carrier, a mere 4 arresting wires were stretched taut across a 60-foot span of the deck. Directly behind these wires loomed the crash barricade, an imposing web of steel cables specifically designed as a last resort to catch aircraft that failed to engage the wires. Beyond this barricade lay rows upon rows of parked aircraft, volatile fuel trucks, and dangerous ammunition carts, a veritable powder keg of equipment, transforming the flight deck into an active and incredibly hazardous combat zone. The underlying mathematics of these landings were brutally unforgiving. A Panther jet, for instance, landing at 125 knots, covered an astonishing 211 feet per second. If a pilot, through any miscalculation or misfortune, missed all 4 arresting wires, he had precisely 2.1 seconds before his aircraft would inevitably collide with the barricade. While the barricade did, on occasion, function as intended, its failures were devastating. When it failed, a 30-ton mass of jet fuel and ordnance would inevitably plow into the tightly packed aircraft parked forward at a terrifying speed of 100 miles per hour. Captain Bruce Williams, who served as the air operations officer on the USS Kearsarge, bore witness to the horrific deaths of 11 men when a barrier catastrophically failed in March 1951. The official accident report painted a stark picture. Aircraft struck barrier at full power. Barrier separated. Aircraft continued forward into 6 parked Corsairs. Resulting fire reached aviation gasoline stores. 14 aircraft destroyed. 11 personnel killed, 23 injured. Carrier operations suspended 48 hours. The sheer scale of destruction and loss was a chilling indictment of the prevailing system. The immediate, universal solution that everyone initially pursued was the development of better barriers. The British, for example, pioneered the concept of the flex deck, an innovative rubberized landing surface that theoretically offered the ability to catch jets even without their landing gear deployed. Test pilot Lieutenant Commander Eric Brown, a man of immense courage and skill, performed 40 landings on this system at Farnborough. In his official reports, he lauded it as fundamentally sound. However, in the privacy of conversations with his closest friends, he confessed it was bloody terrifying. The Americans, in their turn, focused on constructing even stronger barricades. The Bureau of Aeronautics invested a substantial $3.2 million into developing the Davis barrier system, a complex mechanical web engineered to halt a 25,000-pound aircraft traveling at full throttle. When this intricate system performed as designed, it was undeniably impressive. Yet, when it failed, the resulting devastation was absolute and catastrophic. Despite these concerted efforts, merely strengthening the barriers did not prevent the crashes themselves. They merely attempted to contain the resulting damage. Every senior aviator understood the uncomfortable truth. The real fundamental problem lay with the flight deck itself, not just the barricades. Captain William T. Raschurer, who headed the Aviation Military Characteristics Division at the Office of the Deputy Chief of Naval Operations, articulated this critical insight in a June 1945 memorandum. Current landing procedures force all aircraft into a 60-foot impact zone with zero margin for error. This is incompatible with jet aircraft performance characteristics. This terse, bureaucratic language translated to a much starker reality. We designed our carriers for propeller aircraft that could land at 70 knots and abort at the last second. Jets land at 130 knots and can't abort. We're trying to land 1952 aircraft on 1942 ships. People will die until we fix this. There was universal agreement on the diagnosis. Everyone recognized the inherent danger and the escalating problem. Yet no one seemed capable of devising an effective solution. The British explored flex decks. The Americans experimented with stronger barriers, backup barriers, and emergency net systems. The French even attempted to reduce aircraft weight to mitigate landing impacts. Nothing, however, truly worked. the accident rate continued its relentless climb. What was desperately needed was an individual audacious enough to question the one fundamental aspect that no one else dared to challenge. Why did the landing area absolutely have to be parallel to the ship's longitudinal axis? What they truly needed was the unconventional mind of Dennis Campbell. Captain Dennis Royal Farson Campbell, in the grand scheme of things, was not initially earmarked to solve such a monumental problem. By all accounts, he was a bureaucrat, a man of administrative duties. Born on November 13, 1907, in Southsea, England, Campbell commenced his career in the Royal Navy in 1925 as a midshipman. He successfully qualified as a pilot in September 1931. Early enough in aviation history to have flown rudimentary fabric biplanes, yet late enough to grasp that naval aviation was no mere gentleman's hobby, but a rigorous profession demanding unwavering engineering precision. During the tumultuous years of World War II, he commanded Fairey Swordfish torpedo bombers, those seemingly obsolete biplanes that, against all odds, played a pivotal role in crippling the mighty German battleship Bismarck. For his distinguished service, he was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross. No one at the time lauded him as a genius, nor was he considered a visionary. Following the cessation of hostilities, the Admiralty assigned him to the Ministry of Supply as the Deputy Chief RN representative. This was, by all accounts, a desk job, primarily focused on managing the intricate technical liaison between the Royal Navy and various civilian contractors. He possessed zero formal engineering credentials, nor did he hold any advanced academic degrees. His daily responsibilities revolved around paperwork, meticulously tracking development schedules, attending countless coordination meetings, and signing requisitions. However, Dennis Campbell possessed one invaluable quality that no amount of formal education or credentials could impart. He simply could not ignore the tragic reality of dead pilots. In 1951, he attended the somber funeral of Lieutenant Michael Lithgow, a promising test pilot who had been tragically killed when his jet crashed into the barricade on HMS Implacable. Lithgow had been a former student of Campbell's, a vibrant young man of just 23 years. He had executed a perfect approach, maintained impeccable speed, but had, by a cruel twist of fate, floated a mere 6 feet too far, missing the crucial arresting wires. The barricade, designed to save lives, failed spectacularly. Lithgow's aircraft disintegrated upon impact. His widow, left behind, was 5 months pregnant. Campbell stood at that graveside, the weight of the tragedy pressing down on him, and later confided to his deputy, Lieutenant Commander Nick Goodhart, "This is insane. We're murdering them with our own equipment. A pilot does everything right and still dies because 60 FT isn't enough margin for error. There has to be another way." Goodhart, accustomed to the emotional declarations made at such events, expected nothing more to come of it. Officers often expressed such sentiments at funerals. Yet Campbell's obsession with the problem persisted. He meticulously pulled and analyzed accident reports. He personally interviewed numerous landing signal officers. He delved deeply into the study of landing patterns. Lacking the formal training of an engineer, he resorted to the intuitive method often employed by non-engineers. He drew pictures. The profound revelation struck him during a routine train journey from Portsmouth to London. Campbell, engrossed in his thoughts, sketched various carrier decks in his notebook, desperately attempting to visualize a way to afford pilots more crucial room for error. If it was impossible to make the landing area longer due to the ship's fixed dimensions, then perhaps the solution lay in making it wider. But if width was also constrained by the ship's fixed beam, then the only remaining option was to angle it. Angle it. The concept crystallized in his mind. He drew a flight deck canted a precise 10 degrees to port. With this innovative design, the landing zone no longer terminated abruptly at a deadly barricade. Instead, it would now conclude in the expansive, open water. A pilot who, for whatever reason, missed the arresting wires could simply shove his throttle forward, climb away safely, and attempt the landing once more. There would be no barricade to smash into, no parked aircraft to cause a catastrophic collision. Just the vastness of air and ocean offering a life-saving second chance. The idea was so strikingly simple that it almost felt foolish, which immediately suggested two possibilities. Either he had stumbled upon something truly brilliant and revolutionary, or he had completely overlooked an obvious flaw that every real engineer already inherently understood. On August 7, 1951, Captain Dennis Campbell convened a critical meeting at the Ministry of Supply. In attendance were key figures: Louis Boddington, the distinguished director of the Naval Air Department at Farnborough; Rear Admiral M.S. Slattery, the respected chief of naval research, and 6 highly experienced senior aviation engineers, all gathered to hear his proposal, and 6 senior aviation engineers. When Captain Campbell unlatched his briefcase and presented his innovative sketch, the room immediately erupted in a cacophony of dissent. "That is completely illegal," declared Commander James, the senior flight operations specialist, his voice remaining calm yet carrying the unyielding authority of a fundamental law of physics. He asserted that the International Air Navigation Convention unequivocally mandated that all flight operations must align with the vessel's longitudinal axis. Campbell's proposal, he argued, was a direct violation of a well-established maritime aviation law, meticulously crafted over 15 years of extensive carrier operations. This was not progress, Commander James stated with an air of finality, but rather an utterly amateurish and nonsensical concept. Captain Campbell had anticipated a degree of opposition, yet the outright condescension he encountered was unexpected. "Commander," James continued his vehement objections, explaining with meticulous detail that Campbell was essentially asking pilots to execute landings athwart the ship's inherent movement. Aircraft carriers, he elaborated, naturally pitch and roll around their central keel. An angled deck would compel pilots to approach at an oblique angle to this dynamic motion, forcing them into a constant battle against adverse drift. The designated landing area, he predicted, would be shifting beneath them in unpredictable ways, making precise touchdowns exceedingly difficult. Ultimately, this would inevitably lead to an escalation in crashes rather than any purported reduction. Lieutenant Commander Goodhart attempted to interject and offer a rebuttal, but Louis Boddington, the civilian engineer from Farnborough, raised a hand to halt him. "Ask us to stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription." Write a comment about where you are from and what you think about the video topic. "Show me the math," Boddington calmly requested. His gaze fixed on Campbell. The captain blinked, momentarily taken aback. "I beg your pardon?" he responded. confusion evident in his tone. "The math," Boddington reiterated, unwavering. "You contend that pilots will be continually battling drift. Quantify it. With an 8-degree angle on a flight deck experiencing 12-degree rolls, what precisely is the differential drift over a 30-second approach window?" A profound silence descended upon the room. Boddington then scanned the faces of the other engineers present. "Anyone?" he prompted, but no one offered a numerical answer or a confident calculation. "Then we shall test it," Boddington declared, breaking the silence with a decisive tone. "Captain Campbell, the Royal Aircraft Establishment at Farnborough possesses a painted outline runway that is ideal for preliminary trials. More pertinently, we can replicate an angled deck outline directly onto HMS Triumph's existing flight deck using simple paint. Within a mere week, we can conduct simulated touch-and-go approaches. If this drift problem is indeed a tangible reality, we will meticulously measure its effects. Conversely, if it proves to be nothing more than theoretical catastrophizing, we will ascertain that truth as well." Rear Admiral Slattery, observing the exchange from his relaxed posture, interjected with a cautionary note. "Lewis, you fully comprehend that if you proceed to paint an angled deck on Triumph, and our pilots begin experiencing crashes, both your career and Captain Campbell's will be irrevocably terminated." "Noted, sir," Boddington responded, with a knowing smile. "And if it actually works, then we will finally cease the tragic loss of pilots, who, despite their flawless execution, are currently perishing due to design limitations." The crucial trials commenced in September 1951. HMS Triumph departed from Portsmouth with a distinct white outline of an angled deck boldly painted across her conventional axial flight deck, a purely superficial alteration, not a structural modification. For a period of 3 intensive weeks, Royal Navy pilots meticulously performed numerous touch-and-go approaches, conscientiously pretending that the painted line represented a genuine structural deck edge. Remarkably, the much-predicted and feared drift problem simply failed to materialize. Pilots, demonstrating an astonishing adaptability, adjusted to the new configuration within just 2 landings. What they collectively discovered, beyond the absence of drift, was an unprecedented sense of operational freedom. Lieutenant Peter Chilton, one of the intrepid test pilots, later penned a vivid account of his experience. He recounted how, during one approach, he found himself too high, inadvertently floating past the arresting wires. Yet for the very first time in his entire career, he was not gripped by the familiar terror. Instead, he simply advanced the throttle to full power and smoothly climbed away. There was no menacing barrier awaiting to destroy his aircraft or endanger his life. There was no other aircraft directly ahead, merely clean open air and the invaluable gift of a second chance. He described the profound sensation as if his very life had been miraculously returned to him. By October, the painted deck trials had unequivocally demonstrated the viability and effectiveness of the concept. However, the truly arduous task now lay ahead, persuading the broader naval aviation community of its merits. Given that HMS Triumph was a British vessel, the carrier force grappling with the most severe operational challenges, specifically the one whose pilots were tragically dying at twice the rate of the Royal Navy's own aircrew, was the American fleet. And historically, the United States Navy was notoriously disinclined to accept operational guidance from British officers regarding the intricate art of carrier aviation. On September 14, 1951, at the U.S. Naval Air Test Center in Patuxent River, Maryland, Lieutenant Commander Eric Brown found himself standing before an assembly of 40 seasoned American test pilots. He could feel the intense scrutiny of every eye in the room, each individual calculating whether he was worthy of their trust. Brown was not just any pilot. He was the Royal Navy's chief test pilot, an aviator who had successfully landed more distinct aircraft types than anyone else in aviation history. He held every significant British naval aviation record. Yet, in that moment, none of those impressive accolades seemed to matter, for he was about to deliver a stark message to the U.S. Navy. Their carriers, he would contend, were fundamentally flawed in their design. "Gentlemen," Brown began, his voice commanding attention, "in the past 12 months, how many of you have experienced the harrowing impact with the barricade?" Initially, 7 hands cautiously rose, followed by 12, then a sobering 15. He then posed a more somber and impactful question. "How many of you know someone who tragically perished hitting the barricade?" This time, every single hand in the room slowly yet unequivocally went up, revealing the pervasive and grim reality of their operational environment. Brown then unlatched his briefcase, extracting a diagram. "I am about to present to you something that the Royal Navy is currently subjecting to rigorous testing," he explained. "It will undoubtedly sound utterly irrational, even insane. However, I have personally executed 63 landings on this very system, and as you can clearly see, I am standing here before you today rather than having been scraped off a flight deck. Therefore, I implore you to extend me the courtesy of listening intently." He then affixed Captain Campbell's diagram to the wall, a depiction of an aircraft carrier flight deck angled 8 degrees to port. The room instantly erupted in a storm of objections. "You propose we land sideways? The landing signal officer will be utterly incapable of accurately perceiving the approach angle. What about the island? You've shifted the entire landing zone perilously close to the superstructure." Brown patiently waited for the impassioned clamor to subside. "Every single objection you just vociferously shouted, we ourselves harbored every single one of those same concerns," he calmly stated. "Then we subjected the concept to rigorous testing. And here is our unequivocal finding. When a pilot misses the arresting wires on an angled deck, they do not face certain death. They simply advance the throttle to full power and execute a clean go-around. It is as straightforward and life-saving as that." Commander Harold Buell, the commanding officer of VF-84, rose to his feet, his posture conveying years of experience. "Commander Brown," he addressed him, "I have been executing carrier landings since 1943. What you are describing fundamentally violates every single principle and procedure we have meticulously developed and refined through 8 years of intensive combat operations. You are effectively asking us to discard proven doctrine, forged in the crucible of war, in favor of what amounts to a British theory." Brown's retort was swift and cutting. "I am asking you to cease dying for what is, in essence, a design flaw." The room fell into a profound and instantaneous silence. Brown continued, seizing the moment. "You are currently landing modern jet aircraft on straight decks simply because that is the infrastructure you possess. However, it is crucial to remember that these straight decks were originally engineered and designed for propeller-driven aircraft like Corsairs and Hellcats which possessed the inherent ability to cut throttle and essentially fall onto the deck, arresting quickly. Contemporary jet aircraft are fundamentally incapable of executing such a maneuver. Consequently, you are forcing 1952-era aircraft into 1942-era operational procedures, and your personnel are tragically perishing as a direct result. The angled deck does not violate established doctrine, rather it intelligently adapts the carrier's operational environment to harmoniously match the advanced capabilities of the aircraft it is designed to support. Rear Admiral Apollo Susek, who held the esteemed position of senior U.S. Navy aviator in London, stepped forward, lending his considerable weight to the discussion. "I have personally observed the Triumph tests with my own eyes," he affirmed. Commander Brown's assertions are entirely correct. The concept is demonstrably sound and works as intended. I have, in fact, already recommended to the Chief of Naval Operations that we proceed with parallel testing on the USS Midway. However, Rear Admiral Alfred Pride, the Chief of the Bureau of Aeronautics, shook his head in disagreement. "We are already actively engaged in testing alternative solutions," he countered. "The Davis barrier, for instance, boasts an impressive 98.7% success rate." 98.7% of what? Brown sharply interrupted, challenging the statistic. "Of the aircraft that actually strike it? What about the pilots who tragically never even reach the barrier because they perceive its impending impact and succumb to panic? What about those who deliberately choose to ditch their aircraft in the ocean rather than risk the catastrophic impact with the barricade at full power? Your statistic, Admiral, measures the performance of the barrier itself. It absolutely does not measure pilot survival." The room once again erupted in a tumultuous debate. A significant portion of the pilots were nodding in agreement with Brown's incisive points, while the other half appeared visibly agitated, seemingly ready to physically remove Brown from the base. Admiral Susek, raising his voice above the din, commanded attention. "Gentlemen, gentlemen, silence!" he bellowed. "We will proceed to test the angled deck concept on the USS Midway. This will involve paint trials and simulated landings. If the concept proves successful, we will then modify a single carrier for full structural implementation. If, however, it fails, we will permanently discard the idea. But we absolutely will not continue to lose our pilots to a design flaw that we have the opportunity to test and potentially rectify. Are we unequivocally clear?" Admiral Pride remained standing for 10 long seconds, his expression unreadable, uttering not a single word. Then, with a heavy sigh, he finally conceded, "Midway trials are authorized. However, let me be absolutely clear. If this British pipe dream results in even a single additional casualty, I will personally terminate the entire program and everyone associated with it." Susek simply nodded in acknowledgement. "Agreed," he responded, sealing the pact. The meeting concluded, and Brown began to pack his briefcase, acutely aware that he had just staked his entire career on the efficacy of a mere painted line. What he could not have possibly known at that moment was that, within a remarkable 90 days, the painted line on the USS Midway would perform so exceptionally well that the United States Navy would proceed to convert the USS Antietam into the world's very first fully operational, true-angled deck aircraft carrier. On January 12, 1953, off the sun-drenched coast of Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, Lieutenant Commander Harold Buell meticulously guided his F-9F-5 Panther jet into the precise landing pattern, following closely behind the USS Antietam. This particular landing marked his 43rd carrier recovery. but it held a unique distinction. It was his inaugural attempt on an angled deck that was not merely painted, but a fully realized, structurally integrated modification. This was a tangible reality, an 8-degree sponson extending prominently from the port side, robustly welded directly to the carrier's formidable hull. Despite the structural integrity, Buell harbored a deep-seated distrust for this novel configuration. His entire professional career had been meticulously dedicated to the ingrained practice of either successfully snaring the arresting wires or bracing for the inevitable, violent impact with the barricade. This profound instilled fear had, in fact, demonstrably saved his life on 2 previous critical occasions. Now he was being explicitly instructed to completely abandon this deeply ingrained survival instinct. He methodically lowered his landing gear, fine-tuned his aircraft's trim, and then calmly called the ball. "Panther Ball 3.2, he transmitted. "Roger Ball," came the reassuring, crisp response from the landing signal officer, LSO. Buell's initial approach was executed with textbook precision until a sudden, unexpected twist of fate intervened. A capricious gust of wind abruptly lifted his aircraft by approximately 6 feet, causing him to be momentarily high on the glide slope. On a conventional straight deck, this scenario would have immediately prompted the LSO to issue a definitive wave-off, necessitating Buell to climb away, expend precious fuel, and then re-enter the pattern for another attempt. However, on this particular day, the LSO remained conspicuously silent. This silence was not an oversight, but a deliberate operational shift. On an angled deck, being slightly high was not considered a catastrophic failure. Rather, it was perceived as a valuable opportunity for a graceful correction. Buell instinctively dipped his aircraft's nose slightly, judiciously bleeding off the excess altitude. Yet, in doing so, he found himself now positioned too long, a clear indication that he would inevitably miss the arresting wires. On a traditional straight deck, this precarious situation would typically trigger an immediate onset of panic, leading pilots to execute desperate, often ill-advised corrections that frequently resulted in catastrophic crashes. But Buell, with immense mental discipline, consciously forced himself to adhere strictly to the new briefing. If you miss, you climb. The deck is clear. Trust it. His main wheels then slammed down onto the deck. The aircraft bounced once. His tailhook, instead of engaging, skipped harmlessly over the 1-wire, then skipped over the 2-wire, then over the 3-wire, and finally over the 4-wire. He had missed every single one. On a straight deck, at that precise moment, the formidable barricade would have already been in the process of tearing his aircraft apart, transforming it into a mangled wreck. But here on the angled deck there was no barricade. Instead, there was merely open deck extending ahead and clear, unobstructed air. Buell, with a surge of adrenaline, shoved his throttle levers to their full power setting. His J-48 engine began to spool up, reaching maximum thrust in a period of 6 agonizing seconds, an eternity that, paradoxically, felt like an invaluable gift of time. The Panther gracefully lifted off the deck. He was flying again, safe and sound. A mere 23 seconds later, he had seamlessly rejoined the landing pattern, ready for another unpressured attempt. Merely 3 seconds elapsed before the aircraft was re-established within the designated landing pattern. The subsequent approach proved entirely successful, as the pilot adeptly engaged the 3-wire. This flawless landing brought Buell out of his cockpit, his body trembling not from lingering apprehension, but from an overwhelming wave of relief, a profound liberation from a psychological burden he had unconsciously carried for many years. He would later articulate this transformative experience in his personal memoir, describing the act of touching down a jet aircraft on an angled deck as an unparalleled sensation of pure joy for a seasoned tailhooker. He confessed that, for the first time in his entire career, the specter of death no longer loomed over every single approach. The immense psychological weight that dissipated that momentous day was something he had not even recognized he bore until its sudden, profound absence. Over the ensuing 60 days, Carrier Air Group 8 executed an impressive 1,227 landings upon the Antietam's innovative angled deck. During this period, they recorded a mere 8 bolters, instances where the arresting wires were missed, necessitating a go-around and a fresh attempt. Had these 8 bolters occurred on a conventional straight deck, the typical outcome might have tragically included 5 barrier crashes, the destruction of 2 aircraft, and the loss of 1 or 2 pilots' lives. Yet, on the revolutionary angled deck, the result was unequivocally different. 0 crashes, 0 destroyed aircraft, and 0 injuries, an undeniable testament to its unprecedented safety. The compelling statistical evidence presented was irrefutable. Prior to the widespread adoption of the angled deck, specifically between 1950 and 1952, U.S. Navy carrier aviation operations registered an alarming average of 647 Class A mishaps annually. A staggering 52% of all losses during this period were directly attributable to landing accidents. However, following the full implementation of the angled deck from 1955 to 1957, the annual rate of Class A mishaps dramatically plummeted to just 321. Furthermore, landing accidents now constituted a significantly reduced 19% of all losses. This monumental shift represented a 75% reduction in landing accidents and an 80% decrease in fatalities directly related to barrier incidents, profoundly altering the landscape of naval aviation safety. We encourage you to stay with us and watch the end of the video. We would be immensely grateful for your like and subscription. Please also consider leaving a comment below, sharing where you are from, and your thoughts on this significant video topic. Nevertheless, mere statistics, however compelling, often fail to fully capture the profound human dimension of such advancements. It is through the personal narrative of individuals like Lieutenant James Davidson that the true impact of this innovation becomes vividly clear. On a fateful day, March 8, 1953, Davidson found himself guiding his severely damaged Panther aircraft back towards the Antietam. His situation was dire. Hydraulic failure had rendered his flaps inoperable, forcing him to attempt a landing at an alarming 20 knots above the standard speed. On a traditional straight deck, facing such perilous conditions, he would have undoubtedly chosen to ditch his aircraft in the unforgiving ocean rather than risk a catastrophic barrier crash at a 145 knots. However, the Antietam, with its pioneering angled deck, offered a crucial alternative. Davidson, demonstrating incredible resolve, made 4 separate approaches, missing the arresting wires on each successive attempt. On his 4th and final attempt, displaying extraordinary skill and precision, he successfully snagged the 4-wire while traveling at an astonishing 142 knots, marking what was, at that time, the fastest recorded successful carrier landing. His aircraft eventually came to a halt with a mere 11 feet of deck remaining, a testament to the angled deck's extended safety margin. 6 months later, a deeply moved Davidson penned a heartfelt letter to Captain Campbell, expressing his profound gratitude. "Sir, I never had the privilege of meeting you, but I am alive today to compose this letter because you conceived an idea that everyone else dismissed as impossible. My daughter made her entrance into the world last month, and I was present for that momentous occasion because you steadfastly refused to accept that competent pilots should perish due to flawed design. A simple thank you feels utterly insufficient, yet thank you." The transformative impact of the angled deck quickly resonated across international naval forces. The British Royal Navy swiftly incorporated angled decks onto their formidable HMS Ark Royal in 1955. Similarly, the French Navy undertook the conversion of their carrier Clemenceau, and the Australians modified their vessel, Melbourne. By 1957, every major aircraft carrier within the Western world either boasted an angled deck as part of its original design or was undergoing extensive retrofitting to incorporate this vital safety feature. Initially, the Soviets, adhering to their own doctrines, rejected the innovative concept. However, in 1959, following a series of devastating landing accidents aboard their straight-deck carrier Variag, they quietly and pragmatically implemented the angled deck design. Declassified Soviet naval records from 1993 subsequently revealed a dramatic reduction in landing accidents by 68% within a mere 6 months of its adoption, underscoring its undeniable efficacy. Yet, beyond the compelling statistics and international adoption, the most potent and emotionally resonant testimonies emanate directly from the pilots whose lives were irrevocably altered. Captain John Moore, a distinguished aviator who conducted numerous combat missions over Vietnam from the deck of the USS Coral Sea, offered a particularly poignant reflection. He recounted, "I executed 947 carrier landings between 1954 and 1973. On 62 occasions, I experienced a bolter, missing all the arresting wires, on a straight deck. Each of those 62 instances represented a potential barrier crash, 62 distinct chances for me to die or, God forbid, to fatally injure the dedicated sailors working forward on the deck. Instead, thanks to the angled deck, I simply ascended and attempted the landing again." Every pilot of my generation carries the indelible memory of friends who tragically perished in the 1950s by colliding with those unforgiving barricades. We are alive today because Dennis Campbell simply sketched a line on a piece of paper and steadfastly refused to be silenced about its critical importance. By 1975, the angled deck had become so profoundly ingrained and universally adopted that younger generations of pilots were often entirely unaware that aircraft carriers had ever been designed differently. It had transcended its status as a mere innovation. It had simply become the fundamental operational paradigm for carriers. The true mark of a complete revolution, it is often said, is when it becomes invisible, seamlessly integrated into the fabric of everyday practice. While the angled deck undeniably preserved thousands of lives, Dennis Campbell himself never sought personal acclaim or recognition for this monumental achievement. Indeed, his actions and demeanor following this groundbreaking breakthrough might prove even more surprising. Captain Dennis Campbell, despite his pivotal role, never granted a single press interview concerning the angled deck. He was deservedly promoted to Rear Admiral in 1954. He did attend the ceremonial launch of HMS Ark Royal, which in 1955 became the world's inaugural carrier designed from its very keel with an angled deck. When reporters, eager for his insights, approached him for comments, he humbly redirected them to Louis Boddington and the brilliant engineers at Farnborough, crediting their technical prowess. Similarly, when the U.S. Navy extended an invitation for him to attend the commissioning of the USS Forrestal in 1955, the first American supercarrier to integrate an angled deck, steam catapults, and an optical landing aid, Campbell respectfully declined, sending his regrets. His absence was due to his attendance at the funeral of a Royal Navy lieutenant who had tragically died in a training accident. Notably, this was not a carrier-related incident, but a helicopter crash entirely unconnected to any of Campbell's work. However, the deceased lieutenant had served under his command in 1943, and Campbell held an unwavering belief that one must always attend the funerals of one's people, demonstrating his profound loyalty and sense of duty. In 1957, the Admiralty, recognizing his extraordinary contributions, bestowed upon him the CBE, Commander of the Order of the British Empire, specifically for his distinguished services to naval aviation. The official citation was remarkably concise, consisting of just 2 sentences. Campbell, ever modest, simply kept the award in a drawer, never outwardly seeking to display it. He eventually retired from the Royal Navy in 1960 and subsequently accepted a position as a technical consultant for Hawker Siddeley Aviation, where he dedicated his expertise to the pioneering development of vertical takeoff jets. Colleagues from that period vividly recall his almost obsessive focus on pilot safety, a trait that often led him to exasperate designers by insisting on the inclusion of what they sometimes deemed unnecessary redundancies in cockpit systems. Engineer Anthony Marsh fondly recounted, Dennis would invariably slow down every single design review, posing questions like, what exactly happens if this particular system fails at night in adverse weather conditions? We would often inform him that the statistical probability of such a failure was a minuscule 1 in 10,000, to which he would invariably respond, but what does the pilot do when it does happen? He never concerned himself with abstract odds. His sole focus was always on that one individual pilot who, through no fault of their own, might encounter such extreme misfortune. Dennis Campbell passed away on April 6, 2000, at the venerable age of 92. His obituary in the Times spanned 4 paragraphs, while The Guardian published a 6-paragraph tribute. Both acknowledged his profound contribution regarding the angled deck. However, neither in their brevity truly managed to encapsulate the full, monumental significance of his innovation. What it truly meant is that every single carrier landing executed since 1953 has been made possible because one resolute pilot refused to accept the preventable deaths of his colleagues. Today, every aircraft carrier across the globe, whether American, British, French, Indian, Chinese, or Russian, employs an angled deck in its design. Even the U.S. Navy's most advanced Gerald R. E. Ford Ford-class carriers, boasting cutting-edge electromagnetic catapults and sophisticated arresting gear, still feature a deck angled precisely 8 degrees to port, exactly as Campbell meticulously sketched it in 1951. Modern carrier pilots across the U.S. Navy's fleet alone perform over 15,000 landings annually. The bolter rate remarkably remains around 8%. This translates to approximately 1/200 missed wire approaches each year. Without the inherent safety of the angled deck, these 1/200 instances would represent 1/200 potential barrier crashes. The sheer number of lives saved is staggering, hundreds per year, accumulating to tens of thousands over the past 7 decades. Lieutenant Colonel Arthur Black of the U.S. Marine Corps, who piloted FA-18s off carriers from 1985 to 2007, was so profoundly impacted by Campbell's legacy that he actively sought out Campbell's family in 2003 and dispatched a heartfelt letter to them. The letter conveyed, "I never had the opportunity to meet your father, but I completed 147 carrier landings during my distinguished career. Of those, I boltered 142 times, missing all the wires and necessitating a go-around on a straight deck. Each of those 142 instances represented a moment when I might have perished. Instead, I simply ascended and attempted the landing again. Your father, through his ingenious design, granted me 142 second chances. He bestowed upon me a career. He gave me a life. On behalf of every carrier pilot who is alive today because of his vision, thank you." Dennis Campbell, having passed away 3 years prior, was unable to respond to that deeply moving letter. However, his son, recognizing its immense significance and knowing his father never kept his own numerous awards, chose to frame it. He understood that this particular testament, above all others, was one his father would have truly cherished. The profound lesson gleaned from this narrative is that some of the most transformative breakthroughs do not always originate from the established experts or within conventional research institutions. Rather, they often spring from the individual who staunchly refuses to accept "that's how we've always done it" as an adequate or final answer. Captain Campbell was neither an engineer nor a test pilot. He was, in essence, a bureaucrat. Yet he possessed an unyielding inability to ignore the tragic deaths of his friends and colleagues. He harbored the audacity to simply draw a straightforward line on a piece of paper and pose the fundamental question: why not? The angled deck, his simple yet revolutionary idea, ultimately saved more lives than any recipient of the Medal of Honor. It revolutionized naval warfare more profoundly than even the advent of nuclear power or guided missiles. Crucially, this monumental innovation did not emerge from bureaucratic committees or sophisticated laboratories. It was born from a simple train ride, a humble notebook, a preliminary sketch, and, most importantly, the unwavering refusal to be silenced when everyone else declared it an impossibility. This, then, is the authentic story. This is precisely why it holds such enduring relevance. For the next Dennis Campbell might not be an admiral or an engineer. They might not possess impressive credentials or academic degrees. They might simply be an ordinary individual who observes a problem that everyone else has tacitly accepted and, through sheer force of will and moral conviction, refuses to accept it themselves. History, it teaches us, does not exclusively belong to the loudest voices or those occupying the highest ranks. Sometimes it belongs to that singular person who simply will not tolerate good people dying due to a flawed design.